This is Akashvani. In the program Money Talk, now we bring you a discussion on G20 Framework Working Group meeting. The participants are Shishir Sinha, Economic Analyst, and Lalima Aneja Dang, Anchor.
The two-day G20 Framework Working Group FWG meeting under India's G20 presidency began on the 18th of September in Chhattisgarh capital Raipur. Well, the first day saw discussions on global economic outlook and supply chain, and the ongoing final meeting will take stock of the discussions and explore future areas of work. Well, for more on this, we are now joined by economic analyst Shishir Sinha. So after three meetings and in the last 1 year and now the final one, what are the main objectives? Where are we heading?
See, when the declaration is already out, so the one question people will ask that why this meeting is taking place.
Exactly.
But we should remember that there are still 70 days left in the presidency. So India has a lot of things to do. And if you can remember that after this declaration, Prime Minister had said that we will have a virtual meeting to take stock of what the things we have proposed in the declaration. Now there is another meeting which is scheduled to take place next month, which is called Finance Minister Central Bank Governor meeting, what we call as the FMCBG, and that will take place at the sideline of International Monetary Fund World Bank meeting at Marrakesh in Morocco next month. So this working group is what they are doing. They are working on 2-3 things. First, they are just going through all the measures which they suggested and that have been included in the declaration, what kind of progress we have and what more can be done on this thing. The second thing they are discussing is about the world economic outlook, because at this moment we all know that there are economic situation in some of the countries, like China is not very good, and of course the fear of recession has receded when we talk about Europe and US, but still in countries like China, which has a very major role in the overall global supply chain and the GVC, that is going to impact the overall global economic thing. So they are going to discuss about the global economic outlook and possible threat of any kind of what we call in economic language is the headwind. So this is number 2. And number 3, they are going to discuss that what are the ways forward. That means there are some issues which we can take during the FMCBG meeting or the next G20 meeting, which is going to be under presidency of Brazil. So can any issue or can a host of issues can be taken forward for the Brazil presidency G20 thing? So these are the things which I believe that this working group is going to discuss and conclude.
We see now there is a bit of a diversity in the global economic situation, as you just mentioned. US and UK are kind of coming back on track, but China seems to be in the red or orange zone in my own language. Can we come to a conclusion? Can we all come on the same platform, on one platform, and discuss? Because we have a symbiotic relationship in the world, the countries do have, despite that my country first attitude, we can still come back and come to an agreement on one table?
Of course, that's the need of the hour. And of course, the differences will be there. The most important differences is on the issue of debt restructuring.
Yes.
We all know that many of the low-income economies or the poorer economies or the least developed economies are facing a lot of problem in terms of the debt. There are some other countries which are in the middle income group countries like Sri Lanka. They are also having problem on the debt issue. And we all know that what kind of situation they had 6 months back or a year back. So bringing all the countries together, especially the developed countries, to talk about providing a debt resolution to these countries is the most important thing. Because when we are talking about inclusiveness, that inclusiveness cannot come if the countries like say Rwanda or if the country like Ghana or if the countries like Ethiopia, if they are not doing well, if some countries are doing well and some countries or most of the countries are not doing well, then the concept of inclusivity will not work and that will impact the overall world economic order. So this is one area where we believe that G20 can provide a leadership role and they can provide that what we can do. We have seen that during ministerial meeting of what we call as the FMCBG, and also during the G20 Leadership Summit, there were discussions on the debt restructuring. There were efforts to bring all the countries from the G20. So if this kind of universe is providing a solution to overall global economy, that will certainly help. Now coming to the point which you raised about China, since we all know that China has a very important role in the supply chain. At the same time, when we talk about the economy of scale, China is much ahead of many other countries. So if Chinese economy is in trouble, that means the other economies will also be affected. I can give you one example. Like for many of the industries in India, China provides raw material, like the medicine industry. If they are in a trouble, then our pharma industry will affected. And this story can be true for many other countries too. So we also have to think that how we can think of that China should come out of the wood, because we all know that Chinese economy and the data system in China is much under cloud. We do not know what exactly the situation is, but still if we can have some kind of order where the China can also participate, it's a very challenging task to bring them on the table and to take part in the global economic order. But if we are managed to do that, that will certainly help the overall global economy.
Good, you mentioned about the debt restructuring part, because Sri Lanka port is the best or probably the worst example of that. When you mention Ethiopia, that brings me to the next question. How is the entry of Africa or the African Union going to affect the entire global economic scenario, especially in G20?
It's a very big development, because when we talk about the resources, the kind of resources Africa can provide in terms of the natural resources, it's amazing.
Yes.
The only thing is that how we channelize into the global order. At the same time, we also have to ensure that they should get the proper pricing of their produce. Otherwise, what is happening that if you are not in a position to bargain with the countries whom you are exporting your produce, then your recovery or your realization of your resources will be much lesser than what you should get. So this kind of arrangement, bringing African Union into G20, which will, I believe that now we should call it at the G21.
Yes.
So because of the two unions, one is of course the European Union and the second one is the African Union. So that G21 will be able to provide a kind of platform where the African economies will get a better realization for their resources, and they will also get an structured exploitation of the resources. I beg your pardon that if I'm using the word exploitation, because exploitation is having a negative connotation, but I'm using the word exploitation in terms of the economic development. I mean, if they have resources and if they can, that resources can be used in a proper manner, certainly help the African economy to grow. And I will again bring back the point of inclusivity, because when we're talking about the inclusive growth or inclusive global economic order, development of Africa is very important.
Yes, absolutely. And we've done well to get them into the G20 or G21, as you just mentioned, being politically correct on the very first day itself, which was a remarkable feat. Shishirji, Black Sea grain movement has started. How will that impact the grains prices, and what would that mean for India?
It's a very important development because we have seen that when the war started between Russia and Ukraine, the first casualty was the movement of grains from Ukraine to other parts of the world because of some sanction imposed. Now when we are seeing that the cargo is moving with wheat and some other food grains, that will certainly help to bring down the prices, because not just India, many of the economies are having a problem in terms of the food inflation. And we all know that inflation in US or in some other economies, some developed economies, are a very 1% or 8%. It is also said that it is higher than India, because India is always considered as one of the benchmark in terms of the inflation. And there was always a kind of pride for the US people that our inflation is lower than India. But now their inflation is higher than India.
Yes.
So one of the problem is the prices of the food grain. And we also are having a problem because our inflation at this moment, which is 6.8% in the month of August. And if you take the food inflation, which was very high, and among the food inflation, of course, the vegetable prices have come down, but the cereal inflation is still high. And at the same time, when we are seeing the erratic movement of monsoon, that has impacted the Kharif sowing and also the sowing of pulses. So that is going to have some kind of impact on the prices of food grains. When we have the movement, when we can import food grain from, say, economy like Ukraine, that will certainly have a big impact on our inflation, especially the food inflation. So this movement is critical to bring down the inflation, not just in India, but at the global level.
Right. One thing which has been coming up again and again when we talk about future plans and future scenario, one word which comes very often is crypto. When we talk about crypto regulation, is G20 moving towards that direction, bringing out some kind of a regulation for that?
Yeah, one thing is now very clear that we are not going to ban this. So this is going to be another investment option. And of course, why I'm not using the word currency? Because when we say currency, it's a sovereign thing. And a sovereign can be just one. It cannot be more than one. So we already have INR or USD in US or pound in UK, or even say in Bangladesh is taka. So every sovereign has one currency. So we are using the word crypto asset. In India, from the taxation point of view, we use the word virtual digital asset, or what we call as the VDA. Now the big issue was when the taxation was imposed a year back, people were saying that since the taxation has been imposed, this is going to be legal. But one thing we should remember, that taxation does not mean that it is going to be legal. You need to have a kind of proper arrangement where you will say that it is legal asset or it is an illegal asset. That should be in the black and white. Then only we can talk about the regulation.
Right.
Now what has happened? There is a board called Financial Stability Board that has given recommendation, that gave the recommendations in the month of July, just before the Gandhinagar meeting of FMCBG, and they suggested a 9-point agenda for regulation of crypto assets. So for regulation of crypto asset, that FSP recommendations are already there, and if you can recall, that G20 declaration has endorsed those recommendations by FSB. Now the second thing, which is that there is a synthesis paper, which is a combination of the recommendations given by International Monetary Fund and Financial Stability Board. That synthesis paper will be discussed during the Maracas meeting of FMCBG. Now what we are expecting, that during this Maracas meeting, countries will discuss the regulatory structure, regulatory framework for crypto assets. Some of the economies may go for additional measures considering the risk posed for their financial system. And for a country like India, since we have many other regulatory structure also, and the other thing we should also remember, that it is more of a demand issue because the supply is limited. There is a more and more demand. So that is why we are seeing more and more speculation. And since it is technology, which is the evolving technology, so you have to think of infrastructure, regulatory infrastructure, where more and more economies are on the table thinking on the same line, then you will provide effective regulation for crypto.
Yes, aspirational millennials, as they call it, are very, some of them are very fascinated by crypto.
Because the return,
Yes.
the problem is that when you are getting return like say 40%, 50%, 60%.
It's lucrative.
It's lucrative. And we all know that we can control our food intake, but we cannot control our profit. We always think about how much profit we can have. We do not fix a limit for the profit or this kind of earning.
Right.
So that is bringing more and more people to crypto, especially you use the word millennials. Even people who are in the age bracket of 50 or 60, they are also getting attracted by the crypto because of the higher return. But in economics, we say that profit is the reward for risk. And risk is something which you should judge that how much risk you can take. So in terms of the crypto regulation, I believe that there will be a kind of literacy campaign also to explain to the people that since it is a very, very risky asset, so you have to think twice before putting money into that.
Right, as we always say that profit is directly proportional to the risk element. A quick comment on the fact that we have talked so much about financing climate change and food security. What more can be done?
Climate, I believe that climate financing, the developed nations have already assured providing $100 billion. And if they provide $100 billion, that have a multiplier impact of 5. That means 100 billion will give you the benefit of $500 billion. So that disbursement should be quick. That uses of that particular amount should be quick, and just to have the assurance of more and more resources for climate control.
Right. So let's hope the G20 Framework Working Group in the context of international economic cooperation moves in the spirit of Sangha Chatvam. On that note, it's time for us to wind up. Thank you, Mr. Shishir Sinha, for joining us at Akashvani.
Thank you.
You are listening to a discussion on G20 Framework Working Group meeting. The participants were Shishir Sinha, Economic Analyst, and Lalima Aneja Dang, anchor. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani,